Is this the end of the line for Omsi 2? Is the bus simulator Omsi 2 dead? Or is it dying? Welcome to the 9th year anniversary special for Omsi 2, where we answer the burning question: is this the end of the line for Omsi 2? So, without further ado, let's get into it. This is a video that no one else has addressed, but like the videos that mention how Minecraft is dying, it seems only fitting one covers Omsi 2. Omsi 2 was released 9 years ago today, on the 12th of December 2013. Being the leading bus simulator for many years, it's been declining. Why is this? And what does this mean for the future of Omsi 2? Well, when Omsi 2 was released, there was a big reception. It was a big event. Many people created videos. There's big anticipation, and there was a lot of hype before and after. There were many add-ons being created. Things were looking good for Omsi 2. However, there were a few problems. When Omsi 2 was released, it was a laggy, buggy mess. 9 years later, Omsi 2 is a laggy, buggy mess. Why? What happened? Well, the developers quickly abandoned the product, leaving what was essentially unfinished, and moved on to Lotus. And while Omsi 2 may be dying, this is not the birth of Lotus. So let's just start this bus up and then we shall continue. So, what happened? This basically meant that, yes, Omsi 2 was unstable. However, the thing is that whilst this was an issue, as time progressed, this meant a few things. First, many people gave up on maps when they were creating due to Omsi 2's instability. Other people never even bothered finishing stuff. Let me just... So, I'm just... Speaking of Omsi 2 and how brilliant it is, I'm just looking here at the fact that it doesn't even have the... Oh, there we go. So, what does this mean? So, when Omsi 2... So, I guess how to say this and how the things start. Omsi 2, I guess, was always unstable, but as the years have gone on, this has become ever more evident and ever more apparent. And the reason for this is that really many games have progressed, with loading times far superior, with performance far superior, and with stability well beyond the realms that Omsi 2 could ever imagine. And I guess people have over time realized this, and this has led to a loss of patience with Omsi 2. But I guess one of the big shifts within Omsi 2 that kind of really was this nail in the coffin, so to speak, was the closure of the Omsi 2 forum. The Omsi 2 forum was the mainstay for finding all sorts of DLCs for Omsi 2. The public could create maps and buses and then publish them on the Omsi 2 forum. You could always find new stuff, and there was always a thriving community. However, the decision was made by the developer to close the Omsi 2 forum, to basically meaning you could no longer upload new stuff to it, because they wanted to move people over to Lotus.
Hello.
Now, we will get back to Lotus in a while, because, well, Lotus is really just another... It's another matter in of itself. But this basically meant that there was no longer a centralized place for people to find Omsi 2 content. And I guess in a way it kind of killed the big central area where the Omsi 2 community was taking place, and it led to dispersion. But what it also did was it signaled to many people in the community that Omsi 2 truly wasn't what it was meant to be. One, it reassured that basically Omsi 2 was something that has been abandoned, that it was now up to developers to keep it alive, but that basically people are slowly moving on. And this has only progressed, where now many developers who used to be well-known figures in the Omsi 2 community too have moved on. If we look at people like Rolf Westphalen, who made this bus we're driving today, the MB0305, he moved on to work on Lotus, although Lotus by no means will be what will ultimately put the nail in the coffin for Omsi 2. They were nonetheless one of the prominent figures that left. PDP, who made Bus Company Simulator, have now made their own game, City Bus Line Simulator, or City Bus Manager, and there are many other simulators coming. Bus simulators coming, although City Bus Manager isn't really a bus simulator per se. What all this means is that slowly the Omsi 2 community is declining in numbers, and at the same time is it really attracting new members. Omsi 2 is known for its instability, and its instability has only become more evident as time has elapsed. Because as computers have advanced, the outdated 32-bit system that Omsi 2 runs on, limited to only a meager 4GB of RAM, the performance bottlenecks are really evident, and they drive frustration quite high. And over the years with Omsi 2, we've seen many projects be started and abandoned. And whilst there are still people working on projects, this tends to be a small subset of the community. And I guess it's a bit like Train Simulator, where Train Simulator really isn't attracting many new players, but it still has its core base of players who keep the game going. But this, what this means is that in a sense, it's mainly these people who are keeping the game alive. Now one only needs to go look at YouTube videos for Omsi 2 to kind of see this point illustrated. Look at videos of Omsi 2 5-6 years ago and you'd see they'd be making thousands and millions of views. Look at Omsi 2 videos now and they're barely making views in the 4 digits. This indicates that one, there's less interest for Omsi 2 videos in general, but two, that there's less people creating content because there is less demand for the content. But also, many of the YouTube channels that existed out there that were creating videos for Omsi 2 back in the day have moved on. They no longer make those videos, or they now focus on many other games, not just Omsi 2, and they're much less in tune with what is happening within the Omsi 2 world than they would have been in the past. And this may seem cynical or negative, but I guess it is the natural evolution. Omsi 2, after all, is a game that has aged very poorly. It has aged, but aged quite badly. I guess one of the main issues with Omsi 2 was it was never really built for the future.
Hallo.
And I guess what this meant is that when they built, when Omsi 2 was built, it was on an engine that was from 2007, and it really shows. And this also means that Omsi 2 is also not very user-friendly. Installing mods is quite a daunting task, especially for those unfamiliar with how to do it. It is not the simple user-friendly stuff of installing stuff for the Steam Workshop and no issues. Usually, there's a complicated procedures of trying to install freeware add-ons. Even if you install payware add-ons, often you have to have the 4GB patch, you have to reinstall the 4GB patch anytime the game updates, and essentially, it is a painstaking process. And I guess the real thing is that Omsi 2, you know, because it's aged so badly, it's very hard to attract new players. People come to Omsi 2 because I guess it's the only bus simulator that offers a really truly immersive experience, but it also requires a lot of patience. And it's something that isn't really attracting many new players anymore. Because now we've seen more of a shift within the simulator world, less towards realism, but more towards kind of realism is not the sole proponent of what a simulator is about. Now we have simulators that are also focused on like playability, in the sense that they're focused on user friendliness, they're focused on being quite easy to understand and to navigate. They're focused on really loads of other features that have kind of gamified them. This is really exemplified by stuff like Train Sim World 3, Microsoft Flight Simulator, and the Bus by TML Studios, all of which are simulators, but they're not simulators in the sense of Omsi 2, where it's purely the realism that's been the focus, but incorporate many other games, elements. But nonetheless, they have been successful because this is truly what is now bringing people into these simulators. And a similar thing could be seen with Microsoft Flight Simulator. Before Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, Microsoft Flight Simulator X was still a thing, but it died very drastically. Its community was small, it was a small loyal community, but it was a shell of its former self. Its multiplayer had been discontinued a few years prior in the late 2010s, and with Omsi 2 we're kind of seeing a similar thing. It's really just a shell of its former self. Look at any new DLCs and now the hype is much less. There are now keys given to channels with less than 200 subscribers because really there isn't that many YouTube channels that are covering Omsi 2 in such great depth anymore, or that follow it as closely. And it's in a way, it's sad at the same time. It kind of exemplifies that Omsi 2 isn't really what it was in the past, and it is truly time for the community to slowly move on and to find something new, because Omsi 2 has worn the patience of many people, and for many people it is no longer feeling like the hobby it once used to be. It is now feeling much more evidently like a chore. A game that requires much more time just to get things working than when you actually start playing. And I guess the question is Omsi 2 dead? Is it dying? I think certainly it is dying, but what will replace Omsi 2? The bus is probably has the somewhat capacity to do so, maybe Simbus. But you know, after 9 years of Omsi 2, I think we have seen that, in a way, it is no longer what it used to be. And whilst it may recreate history, it too soon will be history, remembered more for its glorious previous days rather than its current state. Now, there are a few more things I want to address with Omsi 2, and where I guess things have kind of seen another shift, I guess. One of the shifts within Omsi 2 is now there's been an increase in, I guess, the move towards payware. And what this usually means is that when there's an increase towards payware, less people tend to start engaging with it, because one, there's less fewer add-ons made. Even if you look at the web disk, if you look at the fellowship, there's a lot less stuff being created. Yes, there's new projects, but these are kind of made by people who've been working on Omsi 2 for a while. There's any new projects being worked on, and if they are being worked on, a lot of them end up being abandoned, or they end up being never being realized in the end, which basically means the same thing as abandoned. And I guess what this means is that as more developers have gone to the payware, this is kind of, I guess, shown, because with the payware DLCs, when you look at them, they no longer get as much interest as they did. I guess Adam London brought back interest in Omsi 2 for a while, and it brought a big hype. But after that hype died down, I think Omsi 2 kind of again fell back a bit to its old, kind of died down a bit as well. And why did this happen? Because I guess as it became harder to find DLCs, and as the game kind of got old, people became frustrated with this, and more people started making payware DLCs, the question becomes, is it worth investing in something that is having a limited future? And yes, there are still the community that are very heavily invested within Omsi 2, and they still follow the game closely, but for a large amount of people who don't play Omsi 2 that frequently, it is more of a trade-off investing in these DLCs. And even now, it has changed the developers of its DLCs a few times, because it's even hard to find people who are willing to make projects for Omsi 2. I guess in the end, what it means is that Omsi 2 has outlived itself, in a way. And really, the reason it survived so long is because nothing has managed to recreate the realism as well as Omsi 2 does. And the community is still waiting, but I think more and more the community, especially myself, are eager for something else, because Omsi 2 really has worn the patience, and at this point it is a bit like Microsoft Flight Simulator X. The avid players will still continue to play it, but the community as a whole, and those with a more vague interest, will wait for something else and will probably shift to more gamesy stuff like Flight Simulator communities did with Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is a lot more gamesy than was the case beforehand. And we'll see increasing numbers of people shift towards the bus and other simulators, because Omsi 2 has kind of worn down its tether. Then there's also Lotus. So I guess the big issue with Omsi 2 was it really had potential, and I guess if the developers kind of saw the fact that, you know, there's a gap in the market of a simulator that focused on realism. However, the issue with Lotus was that I guess Lotus really doesn't fix the underlying fundamentals of Omsi 2, and I think the developers... So when I say developers, there's basically two developers of Omsi 2. One, Rodriguez, has disappeared, nobody knows where he is, and the other is Marcel, who is working on Lotus. And I think he underestimated the fact that just because Omsi 2 was big, that he could get people to buy early access in early stages, and really Lotus has developed very little from its early access phase. It still has major issues, and it's something people have little faith in, and it seems to have been very much a money-making exercise. Yes, they're still trying to focus, I guess, on the realism, but it will never truly surpass what Omsi 2 is. And I think the real thing is what people are looking for in a bus simulator is something similar to the bus, with a bit more realism towards the physics and the engine sounds and the customizability, and basically for users to be able to make their own content. Because in Omsi 2, even now, the problem is that we have kind of reached a plateau, so to speak. Now buses like released by Studio Polygon and Master Studios are very heavy in the textures and are limited in how much they can be built up. And the thing is, also Omsi 2 takes ridiculous amount of times to load. Every time players go into Omsi 2, they see it is full of bugs and issues, and it is really a game that has little support because the developers have completely abandoned it. I guess it was released a messy, buggy state, and it was left a messy, buggy state. And I really think I've kind of mentioned all of the things there is to Omsi 2, but on a more personal level, my personal thoughts of Omsi 2 are I myself have grown apart from Omsi 2. It used to be a game that brought a lot of enjoyment, I guess, but over the years it's lost its interest, and especially during COVID, my interest in it was revived for a bit. I think with a lot of people after COVID, after the pandemic, so to speak, the interest in Omsi 2 kind of wavered, and really we got to realize the major flaws in it. And now even when the new stuff is released, the hype for that stuff is very short-lived. It quickly dies out. It's like if you look at the Renown, there's a bit of hype beforehand, it was released, that was a few days, and then that was that. I think also the Renown in a way kind of indicated a bit more of a shift towards the Omsi 2 community. And what I mean by a shift is that the Omsi 2 community is becoming smaller and smaller. Because by not putting it on Steam, this basically indicated that they're more focusing on the very loyal aspect of the Omsi 2 community that essentially will be there for as long as there's nothing else to replace Omsi 2. And by having this sort of exclusionary, I guess, system, this kind of indicated that the market for Omsi 2 in a way is declining, because there are less people coming into it, there are less people investing in it, and after all, the main proponents of the Omsi 2 community are now the loyal fan base, the ones that are following closely what's happening, the ones that have a strong interest in buses, and the ones that really want a true bus simulation experience and are willing to put up with the very high costs associated with playing Omsi 2. And that is the frustration, the time wasted with loading, errors, and so forth. And it is, in a way, remarkable Omsi 2 has lasted so long, considering how dated it is. And again, I guess that's evidence of the fact that sometimes quality is really important over quantity. We've had many bus simulators being released, but none of them have matched the quality of the physics and of the driving experience of Omsi 2. However, at the same time, there's only so long that this can live, and the Omsi 2 is certainly no longer gaining as much traction as it used to. Even look at the videos Eversoft publishes for ads for Omsi 2 for DLCs. Look at the previous DLCs, they had lots more reviews, lots more hypes. The classic DLCs like Hamburg, Chicago, compare them to the new DLCs that were released by Halleck on the Gran Turismo London, which had some hype, but have largely been forgotten, no one talks about. They are no longer even mentioned because they never really had the same upper hand because they entered the phase when Omsi 2 was no longer as popular. And I guess this is the thing. No one seems to have actually really mentioned this in the video. You see this with stuff like Minecraft and other stuff, but with Omsi 2, you haven't. And I think it is really evident Omsi 2 is dying. Its community now consists of really the strong avid base. Even if you look at the German and the Polish community for Omsi 2, which used to be quite big, it used to create a lot of content. They are much smaller. There's little content being published on there. On that side as well. And then if you look at the UK community for Omsi 2 is still quite strong. But I think the UK community, the main reason that the UK community is still so prominent is because they invested a lot of time learning the tools of Omsi 2. So obviously they don't want to abandon it so early because a lot of time was invested in it, and there is still a core base that enjoys the game. But that's again in this case like what happened with Microsoft with Flight Simulator X and it's happening with Train Simulator, that the players that are remaining tend to be the ones that are the most devoted. But then it's not really attracting many new players in a sense. But that's also expected. And the thing is, we must not underestimate the success of Omsi 2 because Omsi 2 still is only ever the highest sales ever been put on is at about 40%. Eversoft usually doesn't put sales on Omsi 2 below 30%, but they put sales for Tram Sim and other games well below 30% because Omsi 2 has remained quite popular. So even though Omsi 2 is dying, it still is one of the most popular titles ever released by Airsoft, and it is still a title that has high value, hence why it's never been on a large discount. But I think at the same time, those new players that join Omsi 2 don't stick around for long. I think the costs now of playing Omsi 2 far outweigh the benefits. And in an era where Omsi 2 is becoming ever more outdated and not having the knowledge of how to run Omsi 2 is becoming a bigger disadvantage. So, I guess Omsi 2, we will still continue to publish videos of Omsi 2 as long as there's new content being released. But I have to say personally, if it wasn't for this YouTube channel and running this YouTube channel, I probably wouldn't be playing Omsi 2. It has been a nice run, but my interest in it has wavered quite a bit. It creates more frustration for me than it does enjoyment. And I guess really I'm just eager for something new at this point. I think Omsi 2 really has outlived itself. But there's nothing really that's been born that can replace it. Hello. So whilst we might be seeing the slow death of Omsi 2, we're not seeing really the birth of anything new. So I'm very curious folks, let me know what you think about Omsi 2. This is a topic I've discussed in live streams before. And this is something I've been saying for at least over a year and a half. But I thought, you know, on the 9th anniversary of Omsi 2, it was important, I guess, to kind of highlight. Because even Omsi 2, it started out as a game that was meant to recreate, like, you know, allow you to relive the past, now what we're doing now in the Berlin Spandau. But now, a lot of Omsi 2 is just playing specific maps, especially with the UK community. But aside from that, there isn't much, you know, aside from that, I guess it's kind of lost what its core value was about, like allowing you to relive the bustle and bustle of Omsi 2. And maps have become much more detailed, but then again, the hype for them has declined. But I think like any game, every game ages eventually. Nothing lasts forever. So, we must enjoy it while we can. We have invested a lot of hours, money and time into the game. But it is time we also start looking forward. And hopefully something will come about. Because I think it's time. I think. So yeah.
Können Sie sich
Nasenbeute, der
positiv
Michael
verhauen?
Schumacher, ja?
What more is there to say? I guess on that bombshell, on that solemn note, we shall enjoy a quiet, nostalgic ride towards the end of the line, which is just a few stops ahead. And let's reflect on Omsi 2.
Hallo.
Hallo.
I guess what I want to do now is I want to offer a little summary. I think it's good because I realize now the video was kind of a bit messy. I had some points I wanted to make, so I'm going to summarize basically the trajectory of Omsi 2. Omsi 2 started out, I guess, one of the main issues with Omsi 2 is it started out on a kind of bad note. There was hype for Omsi 2, but it was extremely buggy and extremely laggy because it was built on an engine from 2007. It didn't really fix the underlying issues within Omsi 1 that were kind of just ended up being transferred to Omsi 2. Developers later separated ways and abandoned the game. Whilst one never to be seen again, the other moved on to Lotus, thinking that because of the success of Omsi 2, they could replicate something similar within a Lotus. However, that's probably turned out not to be the case. So, what this meant was that Omsi 2 was basically left in the buggy mess of a state that it was. This had angered a lot of people who had given up, who basically gave up on the game. If you look at the reviews for Omsi 2, there was a lot of criticism that it is a buggy mess. However, a lot of that ended up being, not too relevant because the core community that stuck around with those were basically willing to accept that that was what Omsi 2 was. But the Omsi 2 nonetheless ended up being quite a success. There was DLCs that ended up being, fairly popular. It's like namely Chicago. We had Hamburg, Hafen City. We also had the Omsi 2 forum where lots of new stuff was posted. So the Omsi 2 community was still thriving and it was still bustling. But then what happened? The decision was made by Marcel in the hope of shifting people towards Lotus to close down the Omsi 2 community. And while that did a good job of killing Omsi 2, not entirely, but killing a bit of the Omsi 2 community and basically shrinking it, it did not do a very good job of shifting them towards Lotus. Instead, it created anger, but at the same time indicated that Omsi 2 really was an aging game. And from that point on, the Omsi 2 community has been scarce because one, it's been spread further out, and I guess two, because there's been less stuff posted, it's been harder to find stuff, and stuff has basically been more relegated to smaller communities within the Omsi 2 world where you only really know what's happening within that community. That meant the Omsi 2 in a way became much smaller and the community shrunk. As this happened, Omsi 2 mods were becoming more detailed, which were putting further strain on the game, and were highlighting just how outdated the game was and just how badly it had aged. All of this culminating together basically is kind of showing that Omsi 2 is on a downward trajectory. And if you look now at the Omsi 2 content that is created, it gets a lot less engagement and viewership than it did before. And you look at the new DLCs and maps that are related and that are released, the hype for them is much less. The discussion about them is at a much smaller population level because now the community is more tightly knit, but also it is one that basically is very concentrated. There's many new people coming in, and it's become basically plateaued. And I guess Omsi 2 has reached what we call the plateau stage. There's a stage of technology where once the technology reaches its peak, it plateaus. You have lots of people using it, but you have no growth. It's kind of like next big thing is coming about. I think this is where the stage that Omsi 2 is at the moment. A lot of the users have moved on to other things. There are still a community base, but Omsi 2 isn't growing anymore and it isn't falling anymore. And so I think it is safe to say that Omsi 2 certainly is dying. It has plateaued, and whilst it will never be dead because it will always, or won't be dead for a while because there's still a community that will keep it going. It certainly is only a shell of its former self. And now, more than ever, it needs a dire replacement. So, what are your thoughts? Is Omsi 2 dead? Is it dying? Or is this just cynical hyperbole? Let me know what you think. But this is the end of the line, not only of our route, but for Omsi 2. After 9 years, now more than ever, we are eager for a replacement. Thanks for watching, everyone, and goodbye.